The morning sun cast a warm glow over the city, its light reflecting off the cafe's glass front, making it seem almost welcoming despite the chill in the air. I stood outside, hands buried in the pockets of my coat, watching the world go by with a detached interest. People, bundled up against the autumn chill, moved past me, lost in their own thoughts and conversations. I was waiting for Olivia, my soon-to-be ex-wife, for what felt like an eternity. It was our first meeting since she left, since our world together crumbled into dust. I saw her before she saw me, her familiar figure cutting through the crowd. She seemed smaller somehow, less sure of herself. Her eyes scanned the street nervously until they found me. I could see the moment she recognized me. A brief flash of something like relief, or was it regret, passing over her features. "Hello, Olivia," I said as she approached, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. My heart was racing, a tumultuous mix of emotions swirling within me. "Hi," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked down, avoiding my gaze, and I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she wrung her hands together. "It's good to see you." We'd entered the cafe together, the bell above the door announcing our arrival. The smell of coffee was a comforting presence, a reminder of simpler times. Sean was already there, seated at a table by the window, his attention on a book in front of him. He looked up as we approached, his expression unreadable. "Olivia, this is Sean," I introduced them, though they had met briefly before. "Sean, Olivia." "Nice to see you again, Olivia," Sean said, offering a polite smile as he stood to shake her hand. "I hope you've been well." "Thank you, Sean. It's nice to see you too," Olivia replied, managing a small smile. I explained to Olivia how Sean and I had recently reconnected, glossing over the specifics. "Sean's been a good friend, especially lately," I said, catching Sean's eye. There was an unspoken understanding between us, a shared history that went beyond the casual catch-up. Olivia glanced between us, a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. "I didn't realize you two were in touch," she said, her tone neutral but probing. "We lost touch for a while," I admitted, "but sometimes life throws you a curveball, and you find out who your true friends are." Sean nodded in agreement, his gaze shifting to the window, as if lost in thought. The conversation stalled, an awkward silence settling over the table. I knew Olivia was waiting for an explanation, for some clue as to why this meeting was happening, but I wasn't ready to reveal everything just yet. Instead, I steered the conversation towards safer waters, asking about her family, her work, anything to fill the silence. Olivia played along, but her answers were guarded, her gaze often drifting to the world outside the cafe's window. It was clear we were both dancing around the elephant in the room, the reason for our separation, her betrayal. But for now, this fragile piece was all we had, and I wasn't ready to shatter it just yet. As our initial pleasantries faded into the background, replaced by the soft hum of other cafe patrons and the clinking of cups, the atmosphere between us grew tenser, heavier. Olivia sipped her coffee, her eyes avoiding mine, as if the dark liquid held the answers to the questions neither of us dared to ask. I've been meaning to say," Olivia began, her voice faltering slightly, "I'm truly sorry for how they turned out." She looked up, her eyes meeting mine for the first time since we sat down. There was earnestness there, a genuine regret, but it did little to soothe the sting of betrayal. I nodded, my throat tight. "I appreciate that, Olivia. But apologies can't really fix what's been broken, can they?" My voice was calmer than I felt, a mask of indifference I wasn't sure I could maintain. "No, I suppose they can't," she whispered, looking down again. I hope we can find some way to move forward, to be at peace with each other." The conversation shifted awkwardly as we tried to navigate the chasm that had opened up between us. We talked about mutual friends, about work, about anything that could fill the silence without touching the raw edges of our pain. Olivia mentioned her family, how they had been less than supportive since she left. "My parents, they don't understand. They think I made a huge mistake leaving you, and maybe they're right," she confessed, a note of vulnerability in her voice that I hadn't heard in a long time. "It's not just about making mistakes, Olivia. It's about the choices we make in living with them," I said, my words more for myself than for her. "I'm trying to move on, to rebuild something from what's left." Sean, who had been quietly observing our exchange, finally spoke up. "Rebuilding is hard. It's about more than just forgiveness or forgetting. It's about finding a new foundation, something solid to stand on." His words hung in the air, a reminder of the work that lay ahead, not just for me, but for Olivia as well. I glanced out the window, noticing a couple walking past, seemingly lost in their own world. "You know, I ran into Sean's wife the other day," I said, turning back to the conversation. It was a half-truth, a way to steer the conversation away from the precipice we were skirting. Olivia looked surprised. "Oh, how is she?" "Good, good. They seem happy," I replied, avoiding Sean's gaze. "It's funny how life works out, isn't it? The paths we take, the choices we make." "Yeah, it is," Olivia agreed, her voice soft. "Life is unexpected." The conversation dwindled again, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The chasm between us felt insurmountable, a divide too wide to bridge with mere words. As we sat there, in the fading light of the cafe, I couldn't help but wonder if this was how it would always be between us, a series of uncomfortable conversations and awkward silences, a relationship irrevocably altered by choices and consequences. The cafe's ambient noise seemed to swell, filling the gaps left by our faltering conversation, as if the universe itself was trying to smooth over the awkwardness. Sean, who had been a quiet observer for much of our meeting, now seemed even more withdrawn, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere outside the window, his thoughts a mystery. Olivia, perhaps sensing the shift in dynamics, turned her attention to Sean. "You've been awfully quiet, Sean. Is everything okay?" Her tone was laced with concern, a stark contrast to the tension that had characterized our earlier exchange. Sean blinked, as if being pulled from a deep reverie, and offered a strained smile. "Yes, everything's fine. Just lost in thought, I guess." His voice was unconvincing, even to his own ears, and he saw the skepticism in Olivia's eyes. "You know, Sean, it's okay to talk about it," Olivia pressed gently, her intuition sensing the undercurrents of unease. "Whatever it is, maybe we can help." I looked at Sean, a silent question in my gaze. We had been friends for years, long enough to recognize when the other was holding back, wrestling with something unsaid. Sean sighed, the weight of his silence becoming too much to bear. "It's just seeing you two together, trying to navigate through this. It's hard. It reminds me of my own situation." He hesitated, choosing his words with care, aware of the fragile balance of our reunion. Olivia and I exchanged a glance, a mutual understanding passing between us. "If you're comfortable sharing, Sean, we're here to listen," I offered, my earlier reservations giving way to concern for my friend. Sean nodded, grateful for the opening. "It's my marriage," he began, his voice low. "Things haven't been great for a while now. We've been drifting apart, I suppose, and I've made some mistakes that I'm not proud of." The confession hung in the air, heavy with implications. Olivia reached across the table, her hand hovering over Sean's for a moment before she thought better of it and pulled back. "I'm sorry to hear that, Sean. Relationships are complicated, aren't they?" "Yeah, they are," Sean agreed, a bitter laugh escaping him. "And the worst part is, I don't know how to fix it. I don't even know if it can be fixed." I leaned forward, my own troubles momentarily forgotten in the face of Sean's distress. "Maybe it's not about fixing things, Sean. Maybe it's about understanding what you want, what you both want, and seeing if there's a way to move forward, together or apart." Sean nodded, the advice hitting closer to home than he cared to admit. "Maybe you're right. It's just hard, you know? Admitting that it might be over." "We know," Olivia said softly, a sad smile touching her lips. "Believe me, we know." As we sat there, the three of us bound by our shared experiences of love, loss, and the difficult path to understanding, I couldn't help but feel a sense of camaraderie. In our vulnerability, we have found a common ground, a reminder that no one navigates the complexities of the heart alone. The conversation gradually lightened, moving away from the raw edges of our personal struggles to the more neutral ground of shared memories and future hopes. But the undercurrent of our earlier confessions remained, a silent acknowledgement of the pain and healing that lay ahead for each of us. As we finally rose to leave, the cafe now bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun, I felt a sense of gratitude for this moment of connection, for the opportunity to share and be heard. And though the road ahead was uncertain, I knew we would each find our way, guided by the lessons learned in the silence of a shared struggle. The evening had settled around us like a soft shawl, its comforting darkness a stark contrast to the revelations of the afternoon. We had decided to continue our conversation at a small, intimate bar that Sean knew. It was the kind of place that felt like a sanctuary from the outside world, its dim lighting and quiet corners offering a sense of privacy and solace. As we settled into a secluded booth, the weight of our earlier conversation still hung between us, an unspoken acknowledgement of the shared vulnerability. Sean, having opened up about his marital struggles, seemed slightly more at ease, the act of sharing having lightened his burden somewhat. Olivia, who had been mostly quiet since we left the cafe, suddenly spoke up. "I think there's something you both should know," she began, her voice steady, but her hands betraying her nervousness as they fiddled with the edge of her coaster. Sean and I exchanged a glance, the air between us thickening with anticipation. "What is it, Olivia?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. "It's about the reason I left." She hesitated, taking a deep breath before continuing. "It wasn't just about feeling trapped or unhappy. There was someone else." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Sean's expression shifted to one of surprise, while I felt a complex mix of emotions swirling within me, anger, sadness, but also, strangely, a sense of relief at finally knowing the truth. "Who?" The question came from Sean before I could voice it myself. Olivia looked down, her voice barely a whisper. It was someone you both know. Marcus." The name hit me like a physical blow, a betrayal magnified by the familiarity. Marcus, a mutual friend, someone we had both trusted. I felt Sean's gaze on me, full of questions and sympathy. "Why, Olivia? Why him?" My voice was calm, but the hurt was evident, a raw edge to my words. Olivia's eyes met mine, filled with tears. "I don't know. It just happened. I was so lost, and he was there, and it felt like he understood me in a way that I hadn't felt understood in a long time." "And now?" Sean asked, his voice gentle, attempting to bridge the chasm of hurt with understanding. "Now, it's over. It ended almost as quickly as it began. I realized it wasn't what I wanted, but by then it was too late. I had already lost everything," Olivia replied, her voice breaking. The silence that followed was heavy, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The revelation had changed the landscape of our past, coloring our memories with the hue of betrayal. After a moment, Sean spoke, his voice cutting through the silence. "What are you going to do now, Olivia?" She wiped away a tear, looking up with a resolve that hadn't been there before. "I need to make amends. Not because I expect forgiveness, but because it's the right thing to do. I've hurt people, and I need to own up to that." I nodded, the anger giving way to a grudging respect for her honesty. "And what about us, Olivia? Where do we go from here?" "That's up to you," she said, meeting my gaze squarely. "I understand if you can't forgive me. I can't change what I did, but I'm trying to be a better person now. That's all I can do." The conversation that followed was difficult, filled with uncomfortable truths and painful admissions. But it was also cathartic, a necessary step towards healing and understanding. We talked late into the night, not just about Olivia's affair, but about our own fears, our failures, and our hopes for the future. As we left the bar, the early hours of the morning greeting us with a cool breeze, I felt a sense of closure. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it, knowing that the truth, no matter how painful, was always better than living in the shadow of lies. The dawn was breaking, casting a soft golden light over the city as we found ourselves walking along the riverbank. The conversation from the bar had left us drained, but somehow lighter, as if by sharing our burdens, we had managed to lift them, if only for a moment. The early morning air was crisp, a reminder of the new beginnings that each day brings. Olivia broke the silence, her voice reflective. "Do you ever think about what life would have been like if we made different choices?" She looked at Sean and then at me, seeking an answer to a question that perhaps had been haunting her for a while. Sean pondered for a moment before replying. "All the time, but then I realized that every choice led us to this moment. And despite everything, I'm grateful for the lessons learned along the way." I nodded in agreement. It's easy to get lost in the what-ifs and could have beens. But I think it's more about what we do now, how we move forward from here. Olivia smiled, a sad yet hopeful expression. "I guess you're right. It's just hard, facing the consequences of your actions, trying to make things right." "We know, Olivia, but you're not alone in this. We all have our own paths to healing, our own wrongs to right," I said, hoping to offer some comfort. The conversation paused as we reached a point where the river curved, offering a panoramic view of the city awakening. The beauty of the moment was not lost on us, a metaphorical crossroads not just for the river but for our lives as well. Sean, looking out over the water, broke the silence. I think this is where I say goodbye, at least for now. I have a lot to figure out, starting with a long overdue conversation with my wife. Olivia and I turned to him, understanding and respect in our eyes. You're a good man, Sean. She's lucky to have you, Olivia said, sincerity in her voice. And you, Olivia? What will you do? Sean asked, turning the question back to her. Olivia took a deep breath, her decision clear. I'm going to take some time for myself, really figure out who I am and who I want to be. And then I'm going to try to make amends, starting with Marcus. We nodded, acknowledging the difficult journey ahead of her. And you? Olivia asked me, her gaze curious. I think I'm going to write, I said, the idea forming as I spoke. About us, about everything that's happened. Maybe it'll help someone else going through the same thing. That sounds like a beautiful idea, Sean said, a supportive smile on his face. We stood there for a moment longer, taking in the view, the early morning light a symbol of hope, of new beginnings. Then, one by one, we hugged, a silent promise to support each other, no matter where our paths might lead. As we went our separate ways, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought us to this point. Love, betrayal, forgiveness. It was all part of the human experience, a reminder that we are all flawed, all seeking redemption in our own way. As I walked away, I knew that this was not the end of our story, but a new chapter. And though the future was uncertain, one thing was clear. We would always have the memories of this moment, a time when we faced the truth together, and in doing so, found a way to move forward. The river flowed on, indifferent to the dramas of human lives, yet a witness to our reflections and farewells, a reminder that life, like the river, always moves forward, and so must we.